Have you ever caught a younger woman smiling at you and immediately talked yourself out of what you just saw? You told yourself it was nothing, a coincidence, politeness. You looked away before she did and then spent the next hour wondering what that was about. Most men your age do exactly the same thing, and the reason they do it reveals something important about what's actually happening in these moments, something that psychology has documented carefully but that almost no one talks about honestly. There is a documented pattern in attraction research that describes why a woman who is significantly younger than a man will often feel drawn to him in ways she herself may struggle to explain. Not because of his looks, not because of his money, but because of something he radiates that men his age rarely understand they have. Something invisible to them, but completely visible to her. Nobody taught you this. The culture handed you a story about age that was designed to make you smaller and quieter, and you've been carrying that story without questioning it. Today, that changes. Stay with me through this entire video because the third truth we're going to discuss, the one researchers call gravity presence, is the one that reframes every interaction you've had with a younger woman in the past decade. That one lands differently from anything you've heard before. This channel is built for men who are done accepting shallow answers. We go into the real psychology, the real research, and we do it with honesty and respect at the center of everything. Not tricks, not formulas, real understanding. Before anything else, let me be direct about something. Nothing in this video is about pursuing or chasing. It's about understanding why certain dynamics exist, what psychological forces are actually operating, and how a man who understands himself deeply becomes someone that people of all ages find genuinely compelling. This is about awareness and honest connection, never about manipulation or taking advantage of anyone. If your intention going into any interaction isn't grounded in real respect, none of what you're about to learn will work. The people around you will sense the difference between presence and performance immediately. Now let's talk about what's actually happening. The phrase dark psychology gets attached to topics like this because people sense there's something beneath the surface that isn't being said out loud. And they're right. But what's beneath the surface isn't dark in the sinister sense. It's dark in the sense that it operates below conscious awareness. It's psychology that neither the older man nor the younger woman is usually fully conscious of. And when you bring it into the light, it stops being mysterious and starts being something you can understand, respect, and work with honestly. Dr. David Buss, evolutionary psychologist at the University of Texas at Austin, has spent decades studying human attraction across cultures. His research consistently identifies that women, regardless of their own age, show attraction responses to indicators of what he calls resource depth, not financial resources specifically, but the deeper signal those represent. Stability, reliability, the capacity to weather difficulty without collapsing. These are not preferences that women consciously decide to have. They emerge from something far older than conscious preference, and they activate in the presence of men who embody them genuinely, regardless of what year those men were born. The cost of not understanding this is real. Men in their 50s and 60s spend years shrinking in mixed company, assuming the younger people in the room see them as irrelevant, when in fact the psychological signals they're broadcasting are among the most powerful in the room. They talk themselves smaller than they are. They apologize for their age before anyone asks them to. And in doing so, they cancel out the very thing that would have made them remarkable. Let me give you the first truth. I want to call this one the stillness signal. There is a specific neurological response that the human nervous system produces when it encounters what researchers call regulatory presence. Dr. Stephen Porges, the neuroscientist who developed polyvagal theory, describes how the human nervous system is constantly scanning its environment for cues of safety and threat. This scanning is unconscious and relentless, and when it detects a nervous system nearby that is calm, regulated, and unshaken by the social turbulence around it, it responds with something very close to relief. Here is the truth that most men over 50 don't realize about themselves. They have, through decades of navigating difficulty, loss, challenge and recovery, developed a nervous system regulation that younger people simply haven't had the time to build yet. They have been shaken and have returned to stillness enough times that stillness has become their default. They don't flinch at what used to frighten them. They don't spiral at what used to unravel them. That quality is invisible to them because they live inside it. But from the outside, from the perspective of someone younger who is still inside the turbulence of figuring out who they are, it is profoundly and unmistakably attractive. When a younger woman smiles at an older man across a room, often what she's responding to is exactly this. Not his face, not his clothes, the quality of how he occupies space. He isn't performing. He isn't scanning the room for approval. He isn't adjusting himself based on who's watching. He is simply there, settled, complete. And her nervous system registers that settledness as something it wants to be near. Imagine this. You're at a social gathering, the kind with a mix of ages, noise moving through the room in waves. Across the space, a group of younger people are talking quickly, performing for each other, laughing too sharply at the wrong moments, all the small, anxious adjustments of people who haven't quite settled into themselves yet. And then there's a man standing near the window. He isn't working the room, he isn't trying to be noticed. He's holding his drink with one hand, watching the room with the kind of calm interest that comes from a person who finds people genuinely fascinating rather than threatening. A younger woman standing nearby glances at him, then looks away, then glances back. She doesn't fully understand what she's drawn to. She just knows something in her settles a little when she looks his direction. That's the stillness signal, and you carry it whether you know it or not. What this communicates at a psychological level is simple but enormous. Safety. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of someone who could face danger without disintegrating. Someone whose feet are on the ground. And the human nervous system, young or old, wants to be near feet that are on the ground. The second truth is one I want to call the unsent apology. This one requires some honesty, and I'm going to ask you to sit with it. Most men over 50 have been quietly apologizing for themselves for years. Not out loud, in small behavioral surrenders, deferring when they have something valuable to say, shrinking in the presence of younger energy, assuming that energy means something more current or more relevant than what they carry, holding back opinions, stories, insights, because somewhere along the way they absorbed the message that their time has passed, that the room belongs to someone younger, and that their job is to make space rather than take it. Dr. Albert Bandura, the Stanford psychologist whose work on self-efficacy shaped decades of behavioral research, demonstrated that how a person believes others perceive their value directly shapes how they present themselves, and how they present themselves directly shapes how they are actually perceived. It is a loop, and for many older men, that loop has been running in the wrong direction for a long time. Here's what the research shows about what happens when that loop reverses. When an older man stops apologizing for his experience and starts offering it with quiet confidence. When he speaks from his actual knowledge rather than filtering it through the assumption that nobody wants to hear it. The response from the people around him, particularly from younger women, shifts immediately and noticeably. A woman who attended a professional dinner described this exact moment in a conversation that was later shared among a group studying mentorship dynamics. She said she'd been seated next to a man who was nearly 30 years older than her, and she'd come in with the polite intention of making small talk. But within 20 minutes, she found herself leaning forward, not trying to be polite anymore, but genuinely riveted. She said what struck her wasn't that he knew a lot, it was that he shared what he knew, without any need for her to be impressed. He wasn't performing his knowledge, he was simply offering it, and she said something shifted in her during that dinner. She described it as feeling like she'd been sitting in shallow water for years and suddenly found a deeper current. That's the unsent apology in reverse. That's what happens when a man stops holding back what he actually carries and starts offering it from a place of settled confidence rather than performance or need. Ask yourself honestly, how often do you hold something back in conversation because you assume it won't land won't matter, won't be received the way you intend. How many times have you started to say something true and real and then quietly retreated from it? That retreating is the apology. And younger women aren't drawn to men who apologize for themselves. They are drawn to men who offer themselves. This is worth pausing on, because this is also the place where well-meaning advice goes wrong. Telling a man to stop apologizing can sound like telling him to be arrogant, to override others, to make himself too large in the room. That's not what this is. Confidence and arrogance are not neighbours, they are opposites. Arrogance comes from insecurity performing its way through a room. Confidence comes from a man who has genuinely made peace with himself and therefore has nothing to prove. One pushes people away, the other pulls them in. The difference is felt immediately by everyone in the room, particularly by people who are young enough to still be figuring out which one they're looking at. None of this works without genuine care for the person in front of you. You can carry all the settled confidence in the world, and if it isn't paired with honest interest in the human being you're talking to, it becomes just another form of performance. Real connection is always a two-way current. Now I want to give you the third truth, and this is the one I promised you. Researchers in social neuroscience call it referential gravity, but I want to call it simply gravity presence. Dr. John Cacioppo at the University of Chicago, one of the pioneers of social neuroscience, documented throughout his research how humans are constantly and unconsciously ranking the social and emotional weight of the people around them. Not consciously, not deliberately, but the brain is always asking who in this room has genuine density, meaning who carries real experience, real perspective, real history, and who is still largely assembled from borrowed opinions and unexamined reactions. What Cacioppo's work pointed toward, and what subsequent researchers have built on, is that this ranking is felt before it's thought. Before you've had a conversation with someone, before you've heard what they have to say, your brain has already begun assessing their social and emotional gravity based on dozens of subtle cues. Posture, pace of movement, quality of attention, whether their eyes move quickly and anxiously or rest steadily, whether they react to the room or simply exist within it. Older men, men who have genuinely lived, who have made real choices and lived with real consequences, who have lost things and rebuilt things and learned from both, carry a density that is simply not available to someone at 25. Not because 25 is lesser, it isn't, but because density of that kind is only built through time and experience. You cannot rush it, borrow it, or perform it. It either exists or it doesn't. When a younger woman smiles at an older man and isn't entirely sure why, gravity presence is often the invisible engine behind that smile. Her brain has detected someone with genuine weight in a room full of people who are still largely unformed. Not superior, not better, just more completed, more arrived. And the human social brain is drawn to the arrived, because the arrived represents something her own nervous system is still reaching for. Here is the part that almost never gets said. This dynamic carries with it a very specific ethical weight. When someone is drawn to you because of the gravity you carry, you are in a position of natural influence. That influence can be used to genuinely enrich the other person, or it can be used exploitively. There is no middle ground. A man of real character uses that gravity to offer genuine insight, honest presence, and authentic connection. A man without character uses it to take something. The distinction defines who you actually are, not just in these interactions, but as a human being. This is about understanding and respect, not control. This is the place where character becomes the only thing that matters. Imagine this moment. You're in a conversation with someone significantly younger than you. She's asking questions that aren't polite questions. She actually wants to know something. And you realise you have a real answer. not because you read it somewhere, but because you lived through something that taught it to you directly. You could hold it back, you could deflect with humour, or you could offer it cleanly, without embellishment, without needing her to be impressed by it. Just the truth of what you learned. When you do that, something happens in the room. The conversation changes quality. It goes from surface to substance, and she feels it. Not as a romantic signal necessarily, but as something rarer. The feeling of being in the presence of someone real. That realness is what the smile across the room was always about. Most men will hear all of this and still talk themselves out of it. They'll find reasons why it doesn't apply to them, why their particular situation is different, why their age works against them specifically, and they'll walk back into the same rooms, carrying the same quiet apology, missing the same signals, wondering why connection never quite reaches the depth they're looking for. But you're here. You've stayed through the whole thing, and men who stay through the whole thing are already demonstrating the quality we've been talking about. Patience, steadiness, the willingness to sit with something long enough to actually understand it. That's not a small thing. Take one thing from today and let it change how you move through the next week. Stop treating your age as a deficit to be managed and start treating it as a depth to be offered. You have carried more than you give yourself credit for. You have learned things that the room around you genuinely needs, and the people who are drawn to that, including younger women whose smiles you've been dismissing, are not confused. They are perceptive. Presence is not something you build, it's something you stop hiding. If today gave you something real to think about, leave the word depth in the comments below. Just that one word. It helps this conversation reach the men who are ready to have it, and it tells me that this work means something to the people watching. In the next video, we're going to talk about something that almost nobody discusses openly. Why the men women describe as unforgettable all share one specific conversational habit that has nothing to do with what they say and everything to do with how they listen. What that habit looks like in practice and how to develop it is something that will change every meaningful conversation you have from this point forward.